I've submitted a story on the site before, but since then, I've had another experience, so here it goes. I'm in my late teens, and during the summer, I stay home alone. One day around 11 a.m., I use the computer, and out in the hallway out of the corner of my eye, I saw a completely black figure, about 6'5" tall, and very skinny. When I glimpsed around to make sure no one was in the house, the figure was gone. It happened to me about 4 more times over the next 2 weeks. I started calling them the Shadow Man. Then one day, when I was in the kitchen, I saw another Shadow Man. But this time, when I looked around my shoulder, a can of soup fell onto the floor, and the window was closed, and the cat was in the basement. Another moment, I was with my friends in the woods. Keep in mind, these are small woods, and there are never any hunters or trappers there. We were talking about ghost stories, and I told them about the Shadow Man. A minute later, we heard a rustling in the bushes, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a Shadow Man. Then when I turned to catch a glimpse of it, it was gone. I asked my friends if they saw that, and one of them said yes, and the rest looked at me like I was crazy. I'm not sure if these are spirits or just an overactive imagination, but I usually don't imagine things like that. Since the experience in the woods, I haven't seen a Shadow Man since, but you never know. I could see one again sometime. Thanks for listening. My name is Kara, and I have another story I would like to share. This encounter, or whatever it's called, took place in the kitchen. It was about midnight, or 1 in the morning. My mother was asleep. I was on the computer, playing brain teasers or something, and my dog, Susie, a collie, was lying next to me in my chair. As I was playing my game, Susie started to make a noise, in between a bark and a growl. I looked to see what she was staring at, and she was looking into the kitchen. Our house is little, but it's cozy. I couldn't see anything, so I took it as attention-seeking and hushed her. About 10 minutes later, Susie was sitting in the corner directly across from where I sat, and she made a deep growling noise that was so unnatural to me, and she bared her teeth. Not at me, but towards the kitchen. I didn't want to look for, I admit, fear. I thought I would see someone like a burglar of some sort. I looked out of the corner of my eye, and that's when I saw a very, very large white dog. Looked like a wolf dog to me, because it was so large. It had eyes as blue as the sky, and fur as white as snow. It didn't look threatening, but intimidating. It just laid there by the recycling bin and stared at me. Susie whimpered and caught my attention. I looked at the corner of my eye, and the dog was gone. That night, everything was so still, quiet, freaky, the way nothing seemed to be able to move, like a pause button had been invented to freeze the noise after the dog had vanished. I went to my room to lay down, but my room was piled with clothes, books, etc., so I decided to go to my mother's room to sleep, since her bed was a king size and clean. The time passed by as I laid there. 1:30, 2:30, 3:30 a.m., all the way to 4:30 a.m. I just stared at the wall with a background of my mother's snores. I glanced at my mom's door for a second, and there, perched on the door, was a dark cat figure. It had evil green eyes, fur as though it had caught the dark glistening of nighttime. I stared at it for no more than 10 minutes. I rubbed my eyes. It was gone. It seemed as though someone played the sound button again, like the mute button wouldn't work. I looked out the window, on my left, and I saw a cat crossing the street, and I decided to doze off. But something didn't seem right. It was like the temperature dropped 20 degrees in the room. I didn't like it, and neither did Susie. She sleeps at the foot of Mother's bed. She gave a very low growl and came over to lay next to me. I pet her for a minute and glanced at the hallway and saw what appeared to be an overgrown house cat. I fell asleep 10 minutes after that. I still don't know the connection between the dark cat figures and the white dog, but if you happen to know, I'd like to hear from you. I've been reading through everyone's stories, and I decided that maybe I should go ahead and share one of my own. I'm 30 years old now. This happened when I was 4 years old. My parents and I were traveling to Oklahoma City to visit my mom's sister. Mind you, this is a short story, but definitely very eerie. Anyway, on the night before we arrived at my mom's home, we stayed the night at a hotel. My mother is not one to be inconvenienced. She needs her own space. So instead of staying in my aunt's house, she put in a stay at a cheap motel. My father obliged her. Now mind you, I did not know about what happened that night until I was about 15, because my mother was so freaked out about what happened that night that she did not tell me about it until then. Only then did it come out in conversation. She said that sometime during the night, while her and my father were asleep on one bed, and I was asleep on the other, at about 3 or 4 in the a.m., I sat straight up and proceeded to scream. She said that my father tried to console me, but I would not stop, and the worst thing about it was that I did not sound like a small girl. She said I sounded like a grown woman in agony. After a second or two of my father trying to speak to me to calm me down, nothing seemed to work, so he had no choice but to shake me violently. They said that I looked at them and laid back down like nothing even happened. Mom said her and her dad stayed up the rest of the night, and all was well. However, when we arrived at my aunt's house during dinner, my mother brought up the subject, and she explained to my aunt in detail what had happened. My mom said my aunt froze and looked across at my uncle. That was when she proceeded to tell me about the trench coat man. My mom asked, "Who is the trench coat man?" She said last night, while she was sleeping, and while that incident was occurring with her daughter, she was awakened by a trench coat man. A dark figure in a trench coat, of course. He was just staring at her. My aunt then described the eyes that she saw. This man had crystals in his eyes, as if his eyes were so cold, like he didn't care about anybody. So this dark trench coat man, blurred figure with glowing glacial eyes, kept staring at her until he eventually disappeared 5 seconds after. That was when my aunt screamed, and my uncle woke up, asking what was the matter. Of course, that was when my aunt went on to explain seeing the presence of this man. After thinking long and hard about the incident, I'm able to conclude that this was a paranormal incident that occurred telepathically. I must have detected that something was wrong with my aunt, and I guess I was trying to scream to let someone know that something was wrong at the moment, even though I was not conscious and I had no idea what was going on at the moment. The real question I really like to know is, who was that trench coat man? What was he doing talking to my aunt? Or what did he want from her? I know a lot of people are going to say this is a load of bull, and believe me, I really wish it was too. But the fact of the matter is, it actually happened. Ghosts are real, and you don't want to come face to face with them. This is just a collection of experiences I've had, and I don't know if they go together or make any sense at all. First was when I was about 8, and me and some of my friends were out in the backyard telling ghost stories. All of a sudden, we heard a deep voice slowly calling our names. It seemed to come from behind a shed in the backyard, and we all ran away from it. We ran into the house, and then calmed down, thinking it must have been my father. But then I realized my father was at work, and all of our neighbors were pretty up there in age, and I doubted they even knew our names. We were calming down in my room when I looked out the window, and about 200 feet away in an empty field, I saw the outline of what seemed to be a man, but was totally black. But it was in the middle of the day. I couldn't even speak. I finally yelled as it was walking away, and I think when I yelled, it turned and looked back at me. I never saw it again, and even writing about this is bringing tears to my eyes. The other experiences I had were in the same room, in my grandma's house. When I was young, I used to sometimes go to my grandmother's and stay for a weekend or a night. One night, I was sleeping, and I got up half asleep, in some sort of confusion of hearing something in the hallway. I looked down the hall, and there seemed to be a shadow of a tall man against the curtains, with moonlight shining through them. I wasn't scared like the first time, but I actually felt like this man was watching over me, and for some reason, I had a weird feeling it was my great-grandfather. The other time, when I was about 16, I was actually living in that room, because I had moved out of my parents' house temporarily. It was a typical night. I laid down to go to sleep, but was having some trouble. I finally started to get drowsy, and I rolled over onto my other side, and then out of nowhere, I hear my name whispered urgently into my ear. I even felt the air. I jumped up, and no one was there. I had the door closed, but my grandpa was somewhat of a jokester, so I thought maybe he was pulling a prank. So I got up and looked down the hall, and I saw him and my grandma in bed, watching TV. He may be a prankster, but I doubt he can run that fast. I'm 18 now, and I haven't seen or heard anything weird since, but I also don't spend very much time at my grandma's house anymore. Thanks for reading. I've been pondering where to begin and which experiences to prioritize. I decided to begin at the beginning and submit separate accounts of my experiences chronologically. In other words, I've got many stories to share. I've read nearly half of the stories on this site, which is a really worthwhile form, and I hadn't realized that much of what I've brushed off, for whatever reason, is something that matters to others enough to write about it. My experiences are not earth-shattering compared to what many have endured, but I think they're worthy of reading about. When I was about 7 years old, my mother became involved with her friend's Jehovah's Witness study group. Now that I look back on it, I might want to mention that this was in the mid-70s, and my parents and those friends, a couple, were classic long-haired hippies, and they did their share of the stoner scene. My mother and Grace, her friend, were in a study group with Grace's mother-in-law, and all older white-haired, straight-laced women. They eventually ended up at our house to study, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Theory is this: my mother, who was raised strictly Catholic, was going to become a nun, only to do as her grandmother, Granny, wished. They were very close, and my mother wanted to make Granny proud. That all went out the window when she met my father. She thinks that the opposing forces seemed very interested in having her on their side, kind of like vying for her soul. I know it sounds far out, but I kind of believe it, from witnessing and experiencing the darker aspects of it as a result. She also had many things happen to her all of her life that make my story seem lame. It is prevalent on the maternal side of my family to have had experiences with the otherworldly beings. Anyway, shortly after my mother started fraternalizing with the study group, something sickening started to happen in our house. We had the fold-up, pull-down type of chairs to the attic and our living room ceiling. There was a door at the top of them, but it wasn't at the head of the stairs, as this area was open. Instead, for some reason, it was opposite. If one were to walk around to the back of the attic, open this door, and proceed through it, they'd fall into the living room through the opening in the ceiling. Well, this door started to be slammed with a force that shook the entire house. It scared the living hell out of us. It was really that horribly violent. My parents pulled down the stairs, and this door was ajar. They shut it. It kept happening often. They somehow tied the door shut by the knob. It still happened, but worse. The windows literally shook. Pull the stairs down. It was still tied shut. One day, during the late summer, the group was over at our house, doing whatever prayer stuff they do. My father was at work, and my older brother, Grace's kids, and I were playing outside. We heard screaming coming from inside the house. We ran inside to hear the attic door slamming, beyond what any door should sound like, and this horrid, guttural growling noise coming from up there. It just sounded that awful, that no one can convince me that whatever it happened to be was ever human. Everyone ran screaming out of the house, to their cars, and they were telling my mother to get us too, and get out of that house. Well, we left for a little while, but my mother decided we couldn't be homeless, so we went home. Not my idea of a good time. It continued to happen, usually lasting 5 or so minutes. It happened at least once a night. Well, my mother had an experience shortly after we had gone back to school. She claims that when she was home alone in the living room, with the windows open, the air just went silent. No birds chirping, no chipmunks, no locusts buzzing, nothing. We all lived in the country, away from any other houses. She said she started hearing the sound like a vacuum cleaner. It got louder and louder, and seemed to pulsate. It filled the room, and the walls looked as if they were buckling and waving. She smelled this horrid, rotting stench, and she kinda knew she was in for something pretty awful. She ran into her room. I'd have run the hell out of the house, and jumped into her bed. She pulled the covers over her head. She said she heard something walking slowly across the living room, towards her doorway, which was open. She was just praying, not daring to look. It sounded to her as if we were dragging a heavy cloak behind it, and it was breathing extremely heavy. It was nearly at her bed, and she was just about dying of fear when apparently our school bus pulled up, and it dissipated. She'd apparently had enough. She took any religious materials she had brought into the house from the group, not including her Bible that she had gotten from Granny, which she kept, and burned it in the fire pit out back. I remember being upset when she took both my brothers and my books, which I guess you could say was like kids' versions of Bibles. They were small, pink, hardcover books, and they had pictures, and were easy to understand for me at that reading level. I absolutely loved to read, and it didn't matter what it was. I cried, but they got burned anyway. Well, I got over it soon, as nothing more of that nature ever happened at that house. It left as quickly as it came. It was evil. I strongly believe demonic, and it seemed like it was satisfied that my mother quit the group and burned the literature associated with it. It was not associated with the house. It came with a purpose, and left having achieved its goal. The only other thing I associate with this battle of good and evil of my mother happened when I was in 7th grade. I was trying to sleep, totally different house, but I swore my bed was shaking. I just figured I was being stupid, but it got worse. Still, I tried to dismiss it. It got bad enough to where I became scared crapless. I got up and went out to the living room. I startled my mother. She asked me what was wrong. I told her, and she got these big, weird-looking eyes, like she said she was spooked. She said, "Oh my God, I was just reading the Bible." She rarely opened it, for fear of bringing something on. Well, I was just fine with her not reading it. If it was going to target me to get to her, I just wanted to be left out of the whole thing. I know that probably sounds ignorant, but I truly felt it was demonic, and it scared me out of my mind. After what happened, I felt anything bad might just pop up at any time. Even though I'm not close to my mother, haven't spoken to my family in about 14 years, my heart does go out to her on whatever her spiritual fate is to be. She's not the best person, but she isn't inherently evil, just a broken, miserable woman from years of abuse by both her father and my father. This experience added to my straying from any traditional religion. All I knew of Christianity was what my mother told us as kids, and some of what I read in my pink Bible-like Bible book, and it wasn't much. I'd always had my own thoughts about the whole heaven and hell concept, but I was afraid of burning in this hell if I strayed from it. It just didn't sit right with me. It always scared me, including the concept of God. My concept of him was that he was very quick to punish anyone who had their own free thoughts and let people roast at the drop of a hat. I always felt spirituality shouldn't be a frightening experience, but I didn't have the hair on my butt when I was young to explore my inner beliefs. I was never baptized, and I suppose I'm pagan, if anything. It's confusing, but as much as I don't adhere to the whole Bible concept, I can't dismiss it for others. To end this story, I just want to thank you for taking the time to glimpse into my reality. I also have to acknowledge that some of you may have thought that much of it was due to my parents' use of weed, but myself and all of the others didn't imagine something so wretched. Rest assured, ladies of the study group wouldn't have been altered. The very last noteworthy thing of my mentioning, in accordance to the subject, is that I did later independently, and most unwillingly, encounter another demon-like thing when I was 19. Yes, quite another story. Please tune in. Here's Phantom. Hey guys, so I know today is Tuesday, and it's a big, very important day. You want to know why? Because this video dropped today, and it's important to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Actually, guys, I have a headache, so screw that. Whatever I was talking about, actually, don't do any of that. Just kidding, do everything of that. Actually, you know what? It actually does help if you comment, like, share, and subscribe. It's like voting for me so my channel stays in power for many millennia. What the hell am I talking about? Anyway, guys, seriously, guys, thank you so much. I really enjoyed being your narrator, and that last story I thought was a perfect send-off for this video. You know, I wasn't sure about these stories at first, but then I read that last story and I was just like, ew, that sounded great. So, yeah, guys, let me know in the comment section below what you thought of these stories as usual. I'm always sounding like a broken record and I say the same thing over and over again, so I'm just going to say Flapjack Sue and run down with your panties wide open and your face splattered all over your shorts. Yeah, I don't know what I'm saying, but at least it was nice gibberish. I really gotta go, guys, before I humiliate myself even further, which I do every outro, but it doesn't matter. I'll see you guys, though. Good night, good morning, I love you guys, and I will see you in the next video. So check out the 2 videos up here in the outro if you like. Huh? Right? If you haven't seen them. Bye. Okay, love you.